Yeah. All right, that way Daniel can relax. Okay. So when we left off, we hadn't gotten very far, and we're talking about pressure carburetor, and we had set up the basics right here. Well, now we've got to come up with some way to try and measure and figure out some way to measure air. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up over here, and let's see, I'm going to make some chambers. We'll have this one, and this one. We'll just go like that. And I'll make diaphragms. I'll try and make them in red so you guys know, but a diaphragm symbol would just kind of look like this. So I'll put a diaphragm in there. And so this is going to make up my air metering force diaphragm chamber section. And we're going to figure that out later. I'm going to call this chamber A, and this I'll call chamber B. Now, chamber A, yeah, we'll go with chamber B first. So chamber B is going to be, I'm going to take a little air off from here. Oops, I got to make sure you can understand that, and go right there. There, chamber B. So that is going to be my chamber B. And so what is chamber B now?
Your ambient.
Low pressure.
That is my low pressure. So that is going to be a suction right there. And let's see here. I could, just so we can kind of figure out how this works, I'm going to make a chamber C and a chamber D. And let me see here. And I'll make a chamber E. So C, D, and E. All right. And right here, I'm going to, I'll make this kind of thick, because that is definitely a thick wall. And now I'm going to make a little poppet. A poppet is a type of valve. And so I'll represent it like this. So when the valve moves this way, it's going to close. And when it moves this way, it's going to open. I should have made it down here because I'm not going to use this space. So this way is close, and that way is open. So I have a poppet that's going to open and close. And so what we're going to do is we are going to have fuel come in over here. So this will be my fuel inlet. So fuel inlet. And I'm going to make another diaphragm here. We'll separate this right here with a little diaphragm. Oops. There we go. So they have chamber A and B separated by a diaphragm. I have a partition here that is not a diaphragm. And I've got my fuel inlet over here. And I just got to make a fuel outlet, right? I got a fuel inlet. I need a fuel outlet. So I think I'm going to make my fuel outlet. I'll have a couple of fuel outlets. How do we do that? So we'll do this. I'm going to bring this up. Oops, wrong color. Keep it consistent. Black. There we go, black. All right. So bring this up here. We'll connect it over here. We'll connect this over here. And I'm going to connect this one over here. All right, so now I've got chamber E with fuel inlet pressure. I've got chamber D, I got chamber C, B, and A. And you can see that I've got fuel up in here, fuel chambers coming up, and I've got fuel delivery a couple different ways. And let's see, we should probably make some sort of orifice here. We'll make an orifice here. There we go. Like a main metering orifice kind of a thing, but not quite. All right. So we've almost got this where we can start talking about it, but I think right over here, I'm going to put, I probably should have drew this a little bit bigger. I'm just going to put a little thing with the spring. So right there, if I was going to draw it nicer, I would draw maybe a line like that, something like this. And let's see.
But the idle spring?
It's not an idle spring. I want to draw it nice, but I kind of maybe drew things too small. Let me think how I can draw this so that it actually makes sense. I know, I'll just draw a little bit backwards. So tell you what, I'm just going to erase some of this, just make it really big. How's that? Sorry. I know I hate it when I do that too. So just kind of go like this. That looks terrible. Okay, and I will say that there's another poppet valve right here. I should make it a different color. There we go, green with a little spring that holds it closed. There we go. So I got a little valve there that is on a spring pressure, pushing it closed. So it's pushing it that way, the spring pressure is. All right, now I think we're kind of ready to start talking about a couple things. So we talked about down here, we've got A, B, C, and D. And I made this little poppet valve here. And now I want to make it go all the way through. I'm going to attach it to right here. And I'm going to make it go all the way through here. And I'm going to attach it to right here. Well, that means that this is attached strongly to that diaphragm and that diaphragm. And then right here in this area where it goes through B and C, it just has a little rubber seal or some sort of seal right there. So it can slide in and out. Does everybody follow so far? So this item right here is called a poppet valve. So that's the poppet. P-O-P-P-E-T, poppet valve. All right, so we have the poppet valve there. That's the to the left is closed and to my right is open. All right, so we've got that going, and then we can use some colors here, but we're gonna have to make up our own colors. So I think blue was our standard suction color, wasn't it, from before? So if we keep that, we'll let blue be
Blue is air
suction.
now, I thought.
What's that?
Blue is air now.
Yellow was ambient air.
You're gonna change the arrows.
Light blue was suction. If we go back to the Stromberg carburetor. So let's say light blue, we would do this. Suction, how's that work? So I've got some suction. So as this carburetor runs, we're gonna get suction in this area into B. Yes? I hope you would agree. So we have suction. So what I want you to think about here now is if we even just stopped right here and took a look at what we have going on, this would almost work, right? And I'll use dark blue, has to be fuel because it always is. So dark blue is fuel. So we have fuel is going to come through here and it's going to enter this chamber E, right? And it has nowhere to go. It has nowhere to go. And as long as this poppet was closed, it would stay in here. But as I run the engine and I get suction coming through the venturi, it is going to fill chamber B with some suction, right? And what is it going to do to this diaphragm? So think about it. I hook a straw up in here and I suck
Move
that.
to the right.
Going to collapse it to the right.
It is going to collapse this rubber diaphragm. This is just rubber right here. And it is going to open it. So it's going to cause it to want to open. Now, as it opens, it is going to open this right here and let fuel go out, right? So it's going to let fuel, remember, fuel goes around this. It's just a round thing. So fuel comes through and fuel can come up through here, around here, and it's going to stop right here. Now, why is it going to stop right here? Well, it's going to stop right there because I told it to for a minute. So fuel's always going to go that way. This thing right here, I want you to think of this thing as a pressure regulator. Not a pressure regulator, what do I want to say? Pressure relief valve.
What are you talking about?
This item right here, this where I drew the arrow in green. Why did I draw this thing in green? And I'll draw it over to the side. If I was going to draw it really nice, I would draw it, let me see, this one.
Is it metered fuel?
It's a pressure relief valve. So I've got there. So I've got another valve right here that has the potential to close against that on a shaft. And I'll put a diaphragm on there with a spring that's holding it closed. So there we go. So think about how this would work right here. This spring is going to constantly push this close, right? So this is in a state of perpetual closeness is a bad way of saying it, but the spring keeps it closed, yes?
It's normally closed with no
Normally closed. And if I add fuel, and let's say that it's closed until, what do I want to make this one? Because if I stick with the nice pressure, I can keep it that way all the way through my whole lesson. And I can't remember if I want to say 5, if I want to say a little less. I think 1 is 5, 1 is 7. Right now, I'm just going to say 6, closed until 6 PSI. I'm going to change that probably later. Okay, because one carburetor is different than another. So closed until 6 PSI. So when the fuel comes in here and it presses on this, and it presses on it with 1 PSI, what happens?
Nothing.
Nothing. 2 PSI, nothing. 3, nothing. 4, nothing. 5, nothing. 6 PSI, what happens?
Starts opening.
It starts to open. Okay, well, it's actually going to stay closed at 6 PSI, but the minute I hit 6.1, it's going to start to open. And I get to 7. Now it's going to open more. I get to 8. It's going to open even further. Okay, so the more pressure that comes in here, the more this is going to open. So what that means is if this tries to go to 7, this is going to open more and bleed off any fuel pressure potential, making it go back to 6. Follow? Okay, if it goes to 5, this closes. If it tries to go to 8, it won't. It won't make it to 8 because as soon as this tries to go to 8, this is going to open up further and make
Where would it return to?
6. It's always going to be 6 because it's a pressure.
Like would it return to the fuel tank?
What's that?
The extra fuel, would it return to the tank?
No. Where's it going?
Okay.
To the discharge nozzle.
To the discharge nozzle. So it's a weird way of thinking about it, but it's exactly what it is. It's a pressure relief valve that is going, it's set at a certain PSI. Here I've set it at 6 PSI. So anytime you try and get over 6 PSI, it's just going to bleed off the extra pressure to keep this up here, this right here at 6 PSI. So this is always at 6 PSI. Now, if you don't understand that, this is one of these things where you can't say, I don't get it. I hope it doesn't matter later. It matters.
Basically,
yeah.
So it's volume pressure then? Volume of the liquid? The liquid's putting the pressure, right?
Yes, the liquid puts the pressure on the diaphragm, which pushes against the spring, which opens the poppet valve. The more pressure I try and put in the pipe here, I want to put 10 PSI. I'm going to try and put 10 PSI worth in it. The spring is going to say, oh, no, you don't. And it's going to open up even more and say, you go right back to 6. And if I've got to open this thing all the way up to keep you at 6, I'm going to do it. If you want to shoot 6.1 at me, fantastic. Then I'm going to close all the way down and squeak a 0.1 through it. You want to go 8 PSI? I'll open up a middle bit and get just enough fuel out. But this thing right here is saying, whatever you do, I'm keeping this area right here at 6 PSI.
so would it be more of a regulator than a relief?
No, and if you want to think of it that way, I have no problem with that. The reason why it's a relief is because a regulator is different. Like if you think about an air compressor and the regulator, it doesn't blow off all of the air that it doesn't want. So if you said, hey, I only want 10 PSI of air, the compressor doesn't make 110 and dump 90.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so that's why I call it a pressure relief valve, because a pressure relief valve really does that. We can even take the air compressor analogy one step further. If you have an air compressor, which we do at school, and air compressors have a safety relief valve on it. And it's exactly what I just drew up here. It is a spring with a poppet. And let's say it's set for 130. So you have a pressure cutout switch on the motor that says, hey, whenever you get to 120, you shut the motor off. And it's a safety thing, because if the motor didn't shut off, it would keep pumping. And maybe it'd get up to 140, 150 and explode the tank. Well, so they put a pressure shut off on the air compressor, and they put a safety relief valve on it. So just in case for some reason that the motor didn't shut off and the air pressure in the tank got to be, let's say 130, there's a relief valve that's going to pop open, and it's going to bleed off all the air. It's very loud. If you've ever heard one pop off, it'll scare the heck out of you. But it pops off and drains that tank down until it reaches the safe level and closes.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand. I'm not following.
Well, thank
And your drawing,
Yeah.
are you showing that part on the top right hand side?
Yes.
Is that the same part of the green?
This
Is that
right here.
the green bulb?
Yep. This right here is this right here.
So, well, I don't understand. How is the field lines coming towards the other side? I don't know if you follow.
Right down here.
Backwards. It's backwards.
It's backwards to me.
It is. I drew a little bit backwards, but it's the same thing. Same meaning. I just didn't have enough room here to do all that. I could clean it up and actually try and draw it straight. So
your spring is on the other side, right?
yeah, I made the
So
spring.
I
In
want to try.
fact, I should leave it that way because, or I could just change it. You have to change your drawing, but I didn't leave enough room for all of that. So this would have to come, oops, I want black, pink.
So anything above 6 PSI gets put through the poppet?
Right there. So that's going to come in here. Hang on, I'll have to try and answer that question in a minute. So there, and then here's the diaphragm. Here's the spring, and the poppet. There we go. Okay. So same thing. Now, what was that last question?
Anything above 6 PSI gets pushed through the poppet?
Yep. So every time it gets more. So, and the hard part is, I don't even want to talk about, so if I go back to this upper right-hand drawing, I like this one because I don't talk about where that fuel is going. It doesn't matter. It just dumps it overboard for all we care at this point. If I'm just explaining what's up here, I have a pressure relief valve that is keeping fuel pressure in this line to 6 PSI. And anytime it gets over 6 PSI, we could say it just dumps it overboard. Who cares? It's just going away, right? And so that's the concept you have to get. It's just dumping it away, throwing it away. Don't want it, because this job of this thing is to keep 6 PSI in this line at all costs. That's all it cares about, right? If I gave it a job, say, man, whatever you do, don't let that, because if you do, the whole world will come to an end. Everybody will get a virus and die. So this has to keep 6 PSI in here, and it does. And to do that, it just opens up and reliefs, dumps out anything extra from 6 PSI.
It makes the restriction bigger so you don't have as much pressure.
Makes the restriction. Yes, it does. That's exactly true. So,
Okay. So the spring compressors is equal to more fuel, right?
the spring compression equals more fuel. I don't know.
Your flow, the more the spring compresses, the more
Not
flow
necessarily.
you have.
Yes, the more the spring is getting, well, the spring gets compressed because,
There's more pressure.
well, it's trying to put more pressure. or it's
Yeah.
putting more fuel through.
Got it.
You
Okay.
can never get above 6 PSI. The only way you get above 6 PSI is you max the spring out and still kept dumping more fuel in. That's not going to happen.
So that's the part I don't get it. Like, the spring is set for 6.
Yep.
At 6, it's open, right? But you cannot
starts to
press
open.
the.
Starts to open at 6.
Okay. So let's say the spring can compress. So as soon as it gets 6, that area right there, that's going to reduce, right? So the spring is going to close it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
So if we had exactly 6 PSI, we'll say this is going to be closed. 6.1, it's going to leak a little bit through. 6.2, a little bit more. So, it gets up to 7. Now we got more flowing through. Now I can't say there's 1 PSI over here at 7 because that doesn't work that way. There's no PSI here because it's open. But it's really important that you understand that why, if I said there's 6 PSI right here, you've got to know why. If I said there's 6 PSI here, you need to know why. Because anything over 6 PSI is dumped overboard. Well, in this case, it's not really dumped overboard. They just dump it out of discharge nozzle. And you probably
Yeah, you need the fuel. That's
Well,
the part that I don't get it.
you
If
don't
you
have-
need the fuel.
You don't have to get that yet. So what you have to do is you have to take this off in little bites. And right now, if you're trying to say, wait a minute, I don't understand this correlation. We talked about suction and now we got 6 PSI and what's going on here? It's okay if you don't understand that at all. I haven't even explained it. There's only 2 things that you need to understand so far at this point is that item number 1, suction moves the poppet that way. That's it. Everybody get that? I'm sorry. And I just said it backwards. This way. Suction collapses this chamber and moves it to the right. Everybody got that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. That's point number 1. You're on it. Point number 2 is that there is a pressure relief valve built in up here that keeps this line at 6 PSI.
Got it.
So it's going to be 6 here, but it won't be on the other side of this restriction because that restriction changes everything. So 6 there, 6 there, because these are all connected. 6, 6, and then 6. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
no,
really
I got it.
that you understand that. If you don't, raise your hand
got it.
or
What's in C? That's
what's in
fuel?
C? It's fuel. And what's the pressure in C?
6.
6
PSI.
PSI.
Oh, look at you guys. You're practically a pressure carburetor expert already.
Wait, so how does fuel get into C?
Well, it's just open right here.
Oh, it goes down that way?
Yeah, it goes down that way.
Oh,
So it's going to come up
Alright.
here, go through here, go this way, go down here, go over here, come over to here.
so it splits?
Yeah, it splits. It's all connected.
All right.
But again, so point number 2, if I said this is always 6 PSI in chamber C, you should know why. And that's very important. And the reason why is because there's a pressure relief valve right here that anytime this tries to get more than 6 PSI, this is going to open it and dump the extra fuel out.
Okay.
Got it.
So as
I got it.
long as it works, it'll never be more than 6 PSI. Always, all of the time.
So when it's less than 6 PSI, the engine is not working.
That is correct. Then it doesn't work. So it better be 6 PSI. What if it goes more than 6 PSI?
Then the pressure relief valve will open.
They're right. And so then it stays at what
Or
PSI?
reach.
Goes
6.
back to 6.
Then it stays at 6. What if something broke in the pressure relief valve and let it get to 7 or 8?
You're just going to get more fuel out the discharge.
Then it's not going to work. Then we just say, then the carburetor doesn't work. It's going to be broken. What if it's less than 6? As Daniel said,
You're gonna
and
get
it doesn't work. It's broken. So it had better be 6. So it's always 6. Follow?
Follow.
Mhm.
Okay. That's all you got to know. It's always 6. All right. So we got 2 things. 2 things happening. So if you don't understand that, I say raise your hand up and I'll repeat myself exactly how I did it and thinking that if I speak slower and louder, it'll help. I'm just kidding. I will find a different way to do it. Okay, so there we go. We got two concepts and a very messy drawing, but that's okay. So we have two concepts there. So if we take these concepts and we just try to make it work with what we've got, we could kind of make it work. We could kind of make it work. What's going to happen is as air comes through here, it is going to create a suction. That suction is going to come through here and draw a suction in chamber B, which moves the poppet to the right because it draws this diaphragm to the right. And as it draws to the right, it's going to open this poppet valve, allowing fuel to come through here, up through into D, up this chamber, through a metering jet, into here. Now, once it passes the metering jet, it's going to be 6 PSI. It could be 8, 9, 10 in D. We're not talking about that right yet, but it drops down because of this metering orifice. So if it's 6 there, it really could be 8 here. That metering orifice is the delineating line between where it's actually 6 and 8. So it's something more on this side of it. It could be 8, it could be 10. It's not a constant. But once it gets to the other side of the orifice, it's a constant, and it's 6. When it's in cruise, it's 6. When it's at full throttle, it's 6. When it's at idle, it's something else. We'll talk about that later. So one thing at a time. So this is all going to be 6 in here. And at any time it tries to get to 7 or 8 or anything, this opens more and more fuel goes to the engine. And so that's how it works. But we got to back up and look at what's going on here and be realistic about something. I got 6 PSI right here. What's that, Janet?
So fuel will also go down the poppet to C as well.
Yeah, it's open, right?
So-
Open here, open all the way through here. So it got in this way. It went up, over, and then down into C.
Oh, okay. I thought it went down down the middle.
Nope. This red line, you cannot cross the red line. You cannot cross the black line. So this is C is one chamber and it's completely, A is a chamber completely sealed and not connected. B is a chamber not connected. C is a chamber not connected except through here, back and around. And D is a chamber not connected except for right here. And E, of course.
Wait, Kevin.
What's that?
So you said D will have 8 PSI?
No, I didn't.
Right?
It's just some number.
Oh.
It can be, it's more than 6 though.
Okay,
Kevin,
so wait, that means if it has more than 6, wouldn't that mean that it's going to push the diaphragm back towards the C direction?
You're getting ahead of me though.
Oh,
I
okay.
was at it. No, I shouldn't say 8. I'm just going to say it's greater than 6 in here. It really is. Okay. More than likely. So, all right. And then I said, well, but we have to start looking at reality and facing reality. So number one, I have suction in this area. And do you think that it's 6 PSI worth of suction? Oh, heck no, it is not 6 PSI worth of suction. If we think about what kind of suction that we're creating, if we manifold pressure, we go from atmospheric is 29 or 30 inches out here. And I should have done that in like a dark blue. So air is about 30 inches out here. But by the time it gets in here, oh, I don't know. If we're wide open throttle, it's going to be like 29 inches. So 1 inch of mercury is, what does anybody know what that is? Translated quickly into a PSI. It's not a whole lot.
2.
So, 2 PSI?
No, half.
Half a PSI?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm just going to put that because there's nothing wrong with that. So if I have 1/2 of a PSI here, drawing B diaphragm and the poppet to the right, and I have 6 PSI over here, is it going to make it poppet go right or left?
Left.
Think about it. It's going to push on the diaphragm.
right.
Oh, it's
Okay.
right.
Right.
So this is also making it go to the right. So if this is making it go to the right and this is making it go to the right, I've got a whole lot of pressure making it go to the right. And all it's going to do is open that valve up all the way. But I've got fuel entering D that is going to make it go this way and counteract that. All right, so think about that. Six is a constant. My B is fluctuating. The more air that goes through, the more suction I'm going to get. I should have done it PSI wise. It's not an absolute, it's Bernoulli's principle. So it's based upon how much air is going across here, not absolute pressure. So the more air that goes through, the more suction I'm going to get. I shouldn't have said PSI. That wasn't.
So it's like kind of like tug of war. It's always like in the.
It is 100% exactly like a tug of war. That was a great analogy. And if we really kind of look at this, we'll expand on that. This tug of war analogy. I have A. I need my pen. I have A. A is going to the right. B is going to the right. C is going to the right. And D is going to the left. Can you see that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you don't know about A yet because I haven't talked about it, but it's going to. So, well, let's finish off. We'll keep talking here. Okay. So we've got B going to the right, C going to the right, D going to the left. What about chamber A? What the heck is going on with chamber A? Well, unfortunately, the way I drew it, it's got to go across here. So we'll just go like that. So it does not intermix here. It's one's behind the other. This one's going to come over here. And has a little, they have impact tubes. So that's an impact tube. So that's a impact tube. And that impact tube is just going to pick up air that is coming through. It's going to impact the tube. And there's a couple of them in here. There's 4 or 5. And it's going to come through here. And well, now I got air is blue. Air should be what? I should have made it some other color. Purple.
Yellow.
Yellow.
Okay, our fuel.
Yellow. Oh, yellow. That's what that should be. Yellow's hard to see, but okay, yellow. That's right. I meant to make it yellow from the get-go. So we have yellow. This is going to be yellow. This is going to be yellow, and it's going to push that way. So there we go. I got A and B. So that means that the pen is glitchy. A, nope, black. A plus B equals air metering force. Air metering force. Air metering force.
So A is just taking ram air.
That's exactly it. A is ram air.
And A and B are going to go hand in hand together, right? Because the more air you come, the more suction you produce. So they're going to be like, they're going to go hand in hand, right?
They go hand in hand and they are complementary.
Okay.
So you're absolutely correct. The more I open up this valve right here, the throttle valve, the higher A is going to get and the higher B is going to get. So that means the higher the air metering force is going to get.
Okay, Kevin.
Yeah.
Is that tube on A is going to be bigger than the one that goes on B?
Not necessarily. It's big enough for air. I think they're about the same size, roughly.
Okay, just saying that because the bigger the diameter is going to give more air force, right?
Yeah, but they're calibrated. Let me see. I was hoping to see this carburetor here had actual, had them, but this one is a bad example. It's actually comes around the outer side here. So you can't really see them. If you're looking at a Bendix fuel injection system, which I didn't bring, they actually have really nice big, oh I did. Wait a minute. Where Here we go. There we go. I love this one. This is actually a Bendix fuel servo for a fuel injection engine. We're going to talk about this next. But you see those tubes right there? Those are the impact tubes for this particular system. So there's 4 of them. They're actually pretty big.
They're like little blast tubes.
Yeah, it's exactly what they are. Gotta be careful though. That's actually a working one. So that's what those look like. They're a little bit hidden on that carburetor I showed you guys. It's a PS5. So, all right. So let's see. Back to this here. So, all right. So you guys are doing great. So you know that A plus B is air metering force, and you know that A and B are always going to work together, and they're going to work. The more air that goes through, the more pressure is going to be in A, and the more pressure is going to be in B. And really, the way I look at A and B is maybe you could say, okay, when they were building this, we go back to our committees. And somebody said, well, I know, on a carburetor, we just use Venturi suction. It'll be more than enough, trust me. And then another guy said, it's not going to be enough. We're going to need A. A is better. It's impact air. We can really get some pressure going. And then, they fought and fought and fought. And eventually they both said, you know what, let's just do A and B. And so great, they got A and B going together. So, all right, so A and B. So now let's look at what we've got here. So this is where it can get a little bit more complicated, but if you have this going so far, we're almost done and we almost have it. So fuel inlet pressure, we could say it's like 9 to 15 PSI. It can really fluctuate, and that's okay. But we have to regulate it. Remember I told you when we started writing notes that the job of the carburetor, it was going to regulate the fuel pressure first. So it does have to do that. So how is it going to regulate this 9 to 15 down to something that is more manageable so that we always get 6 over here and then we have the right amount ends up flowing out of my pressure relief valve, which is also called a discharge nozzle. So if we look at this, and I'm just throwing out some numbers off the top of my head here. So fuel pressure comes in, and so we have inside of chamber E, we might have here 9 to 15 PSI, right? That's too much. It's too much. But it is going to get regulated as it goes through this little tiny poppet. See, that's just like we did over here. We were regulating it going out. We're going to regulate it now coming in. So we're going to get some sort of regulated pressure inside of D. And I'm just going to assign it maybe a number 8 here. And I'll change these around as we get going and do something a little bit different. So, and we'll write a bunch of notes and do kind of different stuff with this. So I've got a whole bunch of notes I'm not reading. So, all right. So what's going to happen then is this is going to regulate. So let's kind of watch the whole thing and we think about it. So we start this thing up and we're running it. And I go to, I have my wide open throttle. So I've got lots of impact air coming in, trying to push the poppet to the right. I've got suction in here, sucking it to the right. I've got a constant here of 6 PSI, but then over here, I've got 8 PSI trying to close it. So let's just say it's not quite wide open throttle and it's running it. The whole thing is in balance. And this up here is at 6 PSI, and anything over 6 PSI, this is opened and dumping it out. Well, that just happens to be the right amount of fuel, lucky us. So now we go, hey, let's open the throttle a little bit more. And so what happens? A little bit more pressure builds in A, a little bit more suction appears in B, and it tries to move the poppet a little bit further to the right. Well, when it does that, a little bit more fuel comes through into D, and that 8 goes up a little bit higher, and that 8 goes up a little bit higher. We'll say it goes, I'll just make up easy numbers. It goes to 9. So 9 PSI comes through here. Well, it's going to hit the 6, and it's going to, well, if this is 9, you got to jump up to 7. And this is going to say, well, I don't want to jump up to 7 because this will open further. This opens further. It bumps this back down to 6. And this, of course, stays at 6. But wait a minute. This right here tried to jump up to 9 because the poppet moved too far. Well, as this hit 9, it started putting more pressure this way and brought the poppet right back into equilibrium. And I'm going to explain more about the equilibrium. But the idea is the poppet always needs to be in equilibrium And so as two forces, the air metering force tried to open it, it did go open a little bit, but if it's out of equilibrium, you have to understand it'll keep moving. So it's just like if we were trying, we'll use the tug of war analogy because that's great. So if I'm pulling on a rope with 20 pounds and Janet's pulling on a rope on her end at 20 pounds, who wins?
Nobody.
Right. So I was trying to think of some smart ass thing to say if I couldn't. So nobody, we're going to be at a stalemate all day long and nobody's going to do anything. But what happens if Janet pulls with 21 pounds of force?
She's gonna drag
And
your
I
ass.
stay at 20. Do I move an inch?
Just do nudge.
No, if she pulls 21 pounds and I pull with 20, when do I stop moving towards her?
When you pull 21.
But if I don't, what if I only stay at 20?
Keep moving.
I keep moving. I keep moving until I fall in the mud pit or whatever we've set up, or I hit the finish line, right? So at no point do I ever stop moving. In this little tug of war game, we can't do that because if you don't find an equilibrium, if I don't pull back with 21, if I don't match her, then I just keep moving. If the chambers don't eventually equalize, then the poppet keeps moving all the way to the right and the thing just floods it with wide open fuel. So the slightest amount of change would open the poppet all the way and flood it with fuel and the engine would go super rich and die. So you can't have that. So anytime A and B increase, then D has to increase just enough to compensate and stop the poppet from moving and bring it back into equilibrium. And you guys are thinking, is it too late to withdraw from the class?
No, it's almost like run away, right?
No, it's going.
It is Friday.
It is Friday. And here's the really good news is I'm going to just sort of camp out in this little subject until you guys get it. And then once you get this, you will be able to understand the PR58. You'll be able to understand the PS5, and it will be a very, very short step for you to fully understand Bendix fuel injection. So all three of them, well, there's just two types of pressure carbs and a whole different system, a fuel injection system, use this concept. It just changes it around a little bit. They move the chambers around for Bendix, but it's the same thing. So this is really, in a nutshell, this is it. And then we can just add components to it, but the basics never change. The components are actually just bolt on in a different fashion, or it just changes the way it looks. But this is the easiest way to kind of make sense of it right here. So, and if I wanted to add a little more complexity, I would say that it isn't just a little orifice right there. This whole thing right here, it goes into, this is going to be the fuel control unit. So this is the fuel control unit. There is a lot going on in that fuel control unit. We don't have to get into it. You will fully understand how this carburetor works and be able to pass your FAA exams with flying colors if you just use a fuel control unit concept and go, okay, it's going to go into a little black box that gets super complicated with little sliding discs and all kinds of stuff that it's not a really far stretch for you to kind of figure them out once you understand back to the little Stromberg, because it's the same concept. But for now, it's fuel control unit. It's just got some stuff in there. And it's going to allow us to maybe lean it out or richen it. This carburetor has auto lean, auto rich and stuff. And it's just how it slides around to make an orifice is all it really amounts to. But this is in effect is the entire workings of a simplified pressure injection carburetor. Oh, all right. So should we, what should we do here? Oh, we can do this. So so here, this will blow your mind. D minus C equals fuel metering force. Because D is greater. D is going to the left, C is going to the right. So it's D minus C equals fuel metering force.
Hey, Kevin, you're going to tell us, like, when you throttle down, right? When you close the throttle, how the suction is going to reduce and like how, because so that D is going to move towards the left.
Okay, let's do that. So I close the throttle down. Well, A is going to decrease and B is going to decrease. And if these two decrease, A and B, it's going to allow the poppet valve to start to close, right? And if something didn't change, I had 8 here and these are less and less, it's going to slam that closed. Well, that's not good, right? But so what it's going to do is these two close, it is going to let less fuel through the poppet valve. So this 8 is not going to be 8, it's going to go way down, maybe 6.5. And if that's 6.5, then it finds its equilibrium because these two are less, now D is less, and it finds equilibrium. Then this is 6.5 going through here, and this right here starts to drop down to 6.5. So it drops down so that the valve here is going to close a little bit more to make sure this stays at 6. And because this closed a little bit more, less fuel went through, that means less fuel went out to the engine, and the engine is now happy.
So you will never, like, there will always be a little fuel flowing from E to D. It never completely shuts down.
Never completely. Well, if it did, the engine would shut down, and you don't want that.
Yeah, no, that's the point I missed.
But in truth, because we have 3 minutes, this would be a great place to end it. There's a spring right here. So why do we have a spring right there? And that spring obviously is pushing A open. And that is the idle spring.
Oh, okay. Just to keep enough.
Well, we got to think about that. Remember back at idle over here, I have very little movement through here. If I have very little movement, I don't have enough suction to do much of anything, and I have barely any impact air. So A and B are nearly dead. They got nothing going on for them. So I need a little spring to help keep this poppet open, and the spring is open just enough to allow just enough fuel to come through here, to open this up just enough to get idle fuel to come flowing out of there. And so that's how you set idle fuel. It's really not, on idle, it's not a very smart system. You don't have this is actually what we call an analog computer. The computer doesn't work. And so it's just spring holds poppet open. And if you're running a little bit too lean, well, just a spring, make it go a little bit close. If you're running rich, open the spring up a little bit. That's all there is to it. Got it?
So it can never go past, B can never go past A. Is that what you're saying?
B
because of the spring?
B can never go past A. I'm not sure about that.
Like it can't collapse all the way.
Yeah, exactly. It can't collapse all the way. It's got something that keeps it there. Now we're going to add again some complexity to this as we go, but for the most part, that's it.
Hey, I have a dumb question. Why would you need C? What would happen if you don't build a C?
Okay, so if you didn't have C and D over here, okay, A and B are only going to equal a few PSI. And so if I have just A and B, and let's say I had 2 PSI here, 2 PSI, over here I've got 8 or 10, it would never work.
Okay, so
so maybe I could have put a spring in here that was 6 PSI. I suppose that could have worked, but.
Okay, got it, okay.
And C is always full of fuel, right?
Always full of fuel and always constant at 6.
So you got your air side and your fuel side.
So yes. Now the 6 PSI in C is simply there to minus the D, because D is too much and it would always win. So you got to give it something to help out A and B. So that 6 comes in C, chamber C. It's helping out A and B. I felt sorry for them.
No, that makes sense, Kevin.
Okay. All right, it's 5:20, so we'll take a break. I'll leave this up.